Right, I'm back. I'm back. I did it again. I've gone off air. So if you just missed what I was just talking about, I was just talking about how people actually pay good money for frustration, how frustration is actually a pleasure. It's connected with pleasure, and that people will go out and buy a jigsaw puzzle. People will go out and buy a Rubik's Cube. People will go out and buy a form of entertainment where you're put on the spot. That's why people play board games, that's why people go to the Olympics and they go and compete, because they're putting themselves under pressure. They're putting themselves in a situation where the best is required out of them, and it takes work and it takes effort. And so essentially work and effort are actually attached to pleasure as well. And somebody who avoids these things at all costs is not allowing their spirit and their emotional centeredness to be tempered, and their shoulders to be made to be broadened. They just go through as very weak-willed individuals through life with no real foundation. And as soon as there's something bad hits them, they topple over like a tree with very shallow roots. Harev Eliyahu Meir Bloch, another sage, observed that the most eloquent proof of the true existence of Elohim is the very fact that the wicked man must constantly soothe his conscience by declaring that there is no Elohim, and it's almost like a chorus, and they continually have to try and convince themselves and drown out their conscience, and they get it down to a fine art, and after a few years their conscience never bothers them, and the word describes them as having a seared conscience, like a hot iron, and then they don't feel they have their sensitivity is being cut off. Now, verse 2, it says, "From heaven Yahweh gazed down upon mankind." Now, please bear in mind, verse 1, I just looked at one aspect of that verse. If you get a hold of the Tanakh, the Art Scroll Tanakh series, Volume 1, Psalms, there's a lot more commentary that goes into that first verse. And as I've said before, this is just something to whet your appetite. So verse 2, "From heaven Yahweh gazed down upon mankind to see if there be one who reflects, one who seeks out Elohim." Now, gaze down. Although Yahweh dwells high above the earth, the Eretz, he looks down to probe mankind, particularly Babylon, according to Radak. Reference there to the captivity that Israel was in with Babylon. And you've got to remember that the forces that are arrayed against us, whether they be local, somebody locally who's giving you a hard time, or nation against nation, the enemies that are arrayed to assail us on earth, they are being used by the Almighty to actually discipline us and draw us closer to Him. And so, in a sense, the enemies of us are just puppets being used by the Almighty. They're really playing a role in a larger production, a larger stage that is to our benefit, and that they're not going to get any benefit from themselves. So it is in their best interest to very quickly switch sides and do it quickly. One who reflects. So from heaven Yahweh gazed down, and he's looking for somebody who is reflective. And Matzudot David said, "Who understands enough to protest against the evil of destruction." And that's very true. All we have to do to allow evil to flourish is to do nothing. So we have to do something. We have to object, whether it means just writing a letter, whether it means even picking up a phone, having that conversation, or avoiding a situation, or actually confronting somebody in a situation. We need to be able to have enough concern for that actually to be mechanized into action at some point along the way. One who seeks out Elohim, someone who seeks Yahweh in his role as supreme judge, according to Radak, Metzudot David, they're both in agreement there, as opposed to your mate who still lets you do what you want to do because you're under grace. I can tell these are my notes. So lack of fear in Yahweh is endemic. The value of retaining a fear of Elohim, especially when sin lurks at the door, is completely ignored. And so this is where having the fear of heaven comes into play, is when we're poised, looking at being confronted with temptation. We bring that deep fear of Yahweh into our hearts, and we pull back from that what we would otherwise do that causes us to put ourselves more further and further away from the Almighty. And so we've got to get away from this idea that the creator of the universe and his manifestation, his right arm Yeshua, are our mates, is our mate. He's not your mate. He is your king. He is your sovereign. He is your Elohim. He is your all in all. And we give him respect. We give him reverence. And we don't take advantage of the fact that he loves us. Instead, we cherish it, and we do whatever we can every day to actually hone and actually expand that love and reciprocate that love as much as we can while we're in Zimzum, while we're in this contraction, this world, this sphere, this playground, this training ground before we take on the form of Melachim, of angels. Verse 3, they have all gone astray, together become depraved. No one does good, not even one. Genesis 6:5 says, when Yahweh saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Okay, so this is what brought about the destruction, the deluge, the flood in Noah's time, and that was that every person, bar Noah's family, the thoughts and the meditations of their heart was filled and riddled with iniquity. And though they may not have played out all the desires on their hearts into abominable actions, it was if they had been given the opportunity to be able to fulfill all the desires of their hearts, then they would have certainly done so. So it doesn't matter whether you don't have an opportunity to do something. If you have that desire and you're cradling it and nurturing it and playing it out in your head, and the only thing that's stopping you doing it is through circumstance, whatever that may be, then this is what Yeshua was saying when he was talking about one who thinks on evil is as bad as one who actually engages physically in it. They have gone astray. So all King David's soldiers have turned their faces away and gone into a wrong path without protest. They have retreated from truth, says one of the commentaries from the Tanakh Art Scroll edition to Hillel. Isaiah 53:6 says, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each one of us has turned to his own way, his own halakha, and Yahweh has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Okay, Isaiah 53:6. And Job 15:16 says, together become depraved. They have become abominable and rotten. So in reference to the expression together and become depraved, Job says, Job cited here, abominable and rotten. They've become abominable and rotten according to Job 15:16. No one does good, not even one. Now, I think I've got a slide here, and there it is coming up now. Romans 3:10-18, chapter 3, verse 10 to 18 says, as it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks Elohim. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is no one who does good. There is not even one. Their throat is an open grave. With their tongues they keep deceiving. The poison of asps is under their lips, very descriptive, whose mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of Elohim before their eyes. Romans 3, verses 10 to 18. Nicely aligning with the theme there in verse 3 that all have gone astray. Verse 4. Let's get back to our initial slide here. Verse 4. Do they not realize, all those evildoers, they who devour my people as they would devour bread, they who call not upon Yahweh? So what does the commentary say here? Radak is the first sage cited here. Do these evildoers not realize that there is indeed an Elohim who gazes down upon mankind? How can they lack the wisdom, the chokmah, to recognize truth? How can these evildoers think that no one sees? No one sees them, according to Radak. And Rashi adds, ultimately all evildoers will find out what happens to their kind. And then Radak further goes on to explain that the enemies of Israel are so self-confident and righteous in their merciless devouring of Israel because they do not see the calamity that will eventually befall them. And this is what we've got to be aware of. And there's this beautiful analogy that I heard once from Rabbi Lana Nava, and that is two men that are stationed very deep under the ground in a military installation, and they are both sitting before a panel which contains buttons to set off nuclear warheads and to launch them from various strategic points on the surface of the earth. And they've been given strict instructions not to press any of these buttons unless they've been told to by given, if they're called by a commanding officer and given certain codes. And and both of these guys have both of the codes to enable these bombs to be let off. And so eventually they get so bored and they decide, hey, let's just press a button. And they press a button and they fire off one of these nukes, and then bang, it starts World War III. But they're so far under the ground that they can't see anything wrong going on. And they say, look, we've pressed these buttons and nothing happens. We're still here. We're still fine. But eventually they're going to go up to the surface, and they've devastated the entire surface of mankind, and everything's gone. But at the time of pressing the button, they're just sitting there in this air-conditioned bunker, and everything's okay. And so this is essentially what's happening to the wicked. They might go through an entire life and find, hey, look, there's no divine judge even on their deathbed, but eventually the angel of death will call, and judgment awaits all men. So Rabbi Samuel interprets this verse as referring to the gentile hordes who poured into the temple at the time of its destruction. When they entered the sanctuary, they found lambs ready for the daily sacrifice, and they slaughtered and ate them. Then they found the showbread arranged in the golden table, and they ate that too, according to Midrash Shocher Tov there. And that's a pretty horrendous thing to read, and I would have hated to have been there on that day. That's very, very, very intense. Radak says, as Israel's enemies devour them, they never dreamt that Yahweh was watching, so they never called out to him. They imagined that there is no judgment, and so they were never even frightened into repentance. And this is the same, you can refer again to this analogy of these two soldiers who are in this bunker. They've got no indication that there's anything bad happening, even though they've chosen the wrong path by pressing these buttons. And so they live out their entire lives, or they continue their shift to the very end, just in the same manner really that they started in, only that they've pressed the buttons and done the wrong thing. Verse 5. There they will be stricken with terror, for Elohim is with the righteous generation. All right, so let's see what we've got here. When Nebuchadnezzar had taken the holy vessels out of the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple, before he destroyed it, not even he dared to use them for anything profane. However, Belshazzar, the prince of Babylon, was brazen enough to use the holy vessels for his debauchery, according to Rashi. And in Daniel 5, in the midst of his revelry, an eerie sight of a man's hand writes an undecipherable message on the wall of his banquet chamber. The message foretold the loss of Belshazzar's kingdom and his own eventual doom. The king's appearance changed, and his thoughts became confused, and the joints of his loins were loosened, and his knees were knocking one against the other. Daniel 5 and 7. So I'm not sure if they're basically saying there that he lost control of his ability to walk and stay upright, but it certainly doesn't seem good. I'll have to read through Daniel 5 again and find out a little bit more of what happens there, but that's pretty intense. Verse 6. You put to shame the plans of the poor, because Yahweh is his refuge. You mock the plans of Israel, who are poor and afflicted, according to Rashi. The wicked nations scoff at Israel's reliance on Elohim's help, because they deny Yahweh's existence. Since they have not yet been punished, they taunt and shame Israel for this and ask, where is your Elohim, Radak and David? According to Radak there. And we see this repeated in the Psalms when David's enemies are saying, where is your Elohim? If your Elohim, your relation with him is so solid, where is he now? And then in defiance to that, David continues to press into the Almighty even when he's stricken with great illness. Verse 7. This is, I think, the last verse of the night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. Verse 7. Oh, that out of Zion would come Israel's salvation. When Yahweh returns the captivity of his nations, Yaakov will exult, Israel will rejoice. All right, let's see what we can find here. Mount Zion is the capital of Israel's kingdom, and it is there that Yahweh's glory dwells. David therefore wishes this location to be the source of Elohim's salvation, according to Radak. Yes, salvation comes out of a geographical location. It's not coming out of New Zealand. It's not coming out of Africa. It's certainly not coming out of Australia, and it ain't coming out of America. It's coming out of no other location except for Mount Zion. Amen. So Yahweh will allow Israel to do corporate teshuvah. That's not individual. It's not always about you. It's about the nation. It's about the body. I think more of us should be contemplating things to do with the body more than things to do with our own selves, and I think we'd benefit greatly from that. So Yahweh will allow Israel to do corporate teshuvah and thus enable them to be smoothly extracted from exile. Both Jews outside the Holy Land and the lost 10 tribes will return. The unrecognizable, scattered, and putrescent state of Israel will be restored. And that is all I have for you this evening. Very short one this evening. Nonetheless, a lot of cool stuff to look at there and meditate on. Don't give up. In fact, expend more energy. Don't maintain the level of energy that you've got that you're happy with now. Try and put some more effort and some more energy into whatever you're doing over the next couple of weeks, especially when we're in this month of Elul. Continue to go. Now, I'm going through this very important book. I'll just go and get it. And it's something that I encourage everybody to get a hold of. It's called The 60 Days, and Mark's happy because he wanted me to plug this, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm doing it tonight. This is The 60 Days. It's an Orthodox Jewish book. It's not too intense, and it's a spiritual guide to the high holy days, starting from the month of Elul, and it finishes on Yom Kippur. And it goes through, there's a little devotional each day, and I'll open one of them up for you. And here it is. Now, here you've got the devotional over here, and here you've got some key events that occurred on this particular date, both in biblical times and afterwards. And there's also, you'll find a saying from one of the Jewish writings there that's applicable. And up in the corner there, you've got, I've opened it up to Tishri, that's the 3rd of Tishri on this particular page. And it just tells you what passages are applicable for you to be reading at this time. And I don't know what I would do without this book at this time, seriously, because this book really keeps you hitting the beats. Imagine like if you're a musician in a band on stage and you're a drummer or something. If you don't have this book, it's like you're deaf. You can't hear the band, and you're never going to be in the right beat and the right sync. But bear in mind, it is an Orthodox Jewish work. There is no reference to Yeshua or anywhere in the Nazarene writings. But having said that, it's still such a valuable work to look at. And as you go through and read through it, these devotionals each day throughout this high holy day period, Yeshua will resonate with you constantly as you go through it. And it will, if you follow it and you read it and you take it to heart and you do some of the little exercises that it asks you to do there, it will begin to change you and refine you, and you will draw closer to the Almighty. That is a promise. And it's the author is Simon Jacobson, and it's called 60 Days, The Spiritual Guide to the High Holy Days. Author of the best-selling Toward a Meaning of Life, which I'm not familiar with that work. Should get a hold of that. And I think you can pick it up for about $30 or $40. It's a softback sort of spiral bound sort of little thing like that. And you've got the page sort of folds like that, so you can actually put it to where you're up to each day. So I thought I'd just share that with you before I conclude the broadcast this evening. I hope you're having a good Elul. I hope you're making the most of it. Read through Psalms. Get yourselves on a reading cycle of the book of Psalms. Whether you read through the book of Psalms now, very few of us have the fortitude to be able to read through the entire book of Psalms on a daily basis. Some sages do that, or some scholars today still do that. I am currently on a schedule where I'm reading through the book of Psalms every week, and I know that Mark, my shamish, he is going through it with his family, and they're going through it once a month, and that is another valid cycle of doing it. And there are other ways of doing it, and there are other breakups and patterns you can use to read through the book of Psalms. There are additional readings to read on the book of Psalms. One psalm that is very important to be read, very beneficial, I should say, to be read. I think it's Psalm 27. Let me just check. Let me just check. Yeah, Psalm 27. The custom of reciting King David's Psalm 27. Elohim is my light and my salvation. Each day of Elul until Rosh Hashanah is based on Midrash, which associates the light of David and the light of all human beings with Rosh Hashanah. When when by the light of the soul of Elohim searches out the deepest recesses of the human heart, the Midrash associates salvation of David and all of human beings with Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement, when everyone is redeemed. The theme of this psalm is also related to the revelation of the 13 attributes of compassion and mercy which radiate during Elul. Indeed, the psalm mentions Elohim's name 13 times. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to flare up the Almighty's attribute of mercy. So his attribute of mercy for you is to be at the fore of everything else. We want it to override his judgment, his wrath, his justice, and we want his mercy for each one of you to be at the fore. And those of you that have joined me live for the broadcast, I hope that you will receive mercy during this time, and that you may have Yahweh Elohim seek you out and have you draw near to him through peace and shalom, rather than curses and hardships. And thank you again. I will be taking a 3-week break just to get ready and to do what I need to do over the high holiday period. My grandfather's funeral is on the 14th, which is Wednesday, and I'll be going to see my children sometime in the latter part of September. It'll probably be during the week, so it shouldn't interfere with my Shabbat observance. So yeah, I've got a few things on. Thank you so much for those of you that have been joining me regularly in this series. It's just been such a privilege to do this. And Yah willing, I will be back, and we will get back into it in about 3 weeks' time. I'm assuming maybe October, maybe the beginning or middle of October we'll be back. I'll let everybody know. I'll send up posts and give everybody warnings. And we'll resume Psalm 15, and we'll continue in Proverbs chapter 3. Thanks very much for joining me this evening.